afternoon. This is Lori Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian and I work at Cancer Wellness Center, and I'm presenting to you live from the center, but virtually. So thank you for joining me. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching the recording, if you're attending live with me, thank you for being here. I hope you're craving some helpful information today. And if that wasn't a hint, then maybe now you can see clearly on your screen what we're going to be talking about in today's Ask the Dietitian. It's all about cravings. So I get asked this often, how do I handle cravings? How do I deal with them? They're a bad thing, aren't they? Well, we're going to explore what that all looks like today. And in our program Ask the Dietitian, our participants ask me questions. So I prepare a PowerPoint ahead of time. That's what I have here prepared for you today. And I just want to thank you again for joining me. So on the agenda, I'm going to just get right to it. I'm going to list those questions, provide the answers to each of them to the best of my ability, and then I offer some additional resources, including some websites to just sort of explore more about this topic. And then for anyone who gets the opportunity to register for the program, you will get these PowerPoint slides, and then you also have a handful of recipes that I like to share that are somewhat related to the topic for that month. So let's get to those questions. I think this is a good place to start. What is the root cause of cravings? Is it our brain? Is it emotional? Is it our hormones? These three questions were all submitted together, so I thought I would provide them in my answers together. So how do cravings vary from season to season or even as you age? Thought that was interesting. And how can you stop them? And I did not put stop in all caps. That's how the question was submitted. So I got the point. We want them urgently to stop. And I'm going to do my best to answer that. But I want you to stay tuned because I'm going to answer this at the very end of my presentation. So it's a little incentive to stay on and watch with me. Okay, so cravings, as we understand them, are pretty complicated. And there's a complex interplay of several factors that are involved with cravings. And probably for us, they all vary from one person to the next, right? So for some of us, or maybe even all of them for all of us, they might involve messages that we get from our brains. They might stem from behaviors that we've developed over like a lifetime and they become a habit. And certainly, more increasingly over the past couple of decades, it's also thought to be related to having easy access to food, but not even just any food. I'm going to dive into this today. A type of food that makes food more craveable, right? And taste more craveable. Now, there's other things that are thought to affect cravings, and that includes advertising, chronic stress, what do you know, lack of adequate sleep, longer and higher intensity exercise may affect cravings in a way where we have less of them. So moderate walking on the treadmill may not really affect our cravings or our appetite per se, because research has shown that. Isn't that interesting? Lower levels of estrogen, higher levels of progesterone, they seem to increase cravings. Some prescriptions, so that's important to point out. So sometimes steroids, certainly some antidepressants, and some of our antipsychotics can increase cravings and desire for certain types of foods. So I want to introduce you all to something called this little pea-sized part of our brain. And it is responsible for making us desire food. And what it is it's sort of like the reward system in our brain. And as it turns out, hyperpalatable foods, which I'm going to talk about a lot today, hyperpalatable foods cause neurons in this little section of our brain to become very active. And it creates these highly positive feelings of pleasure. What do you know? And it's like, it's less than 1% of our brain. This tiny little spot in our brain does this. And this leads us to seeking these foods regularly. Some argue that the release of dopamine is greater in this reward area of our brain related to the expectation of eating rather than even the food itself. So that's where cravings are thought to really That's which we're going to talk about today, but that's what some people describe, like this sudden this really intense urge and desire. And it's the thought of it. It's not the food itself. So it's sort of like that expectation. It's so like such an urge, right? It's such a strong and intense feeling. Eating a lot of hyperpalatable food a lot of the time may interfere with how our brain recognizes we're full. And we'll keep eating despite having plenty of food to satisfy our body's requirement. So I think that's really interesting as well. Now, eating a high sugar and high fat diet, or a high sugar diet, or a high fat diet can trigger the release of certain hormones that reduce stressful emotions and lead to the habitual desire for comfort. So imagine in the context of a cancer diagnosis, right? Or treatment or survivorship. Imagine the amount of stress and imagine the desire to cope with that stress and how we know that sugary and fatty foods can comfort us. So therein lies some potential and some potential answers for us to recognize that this is a problem and it's not something that's a lack of willpower. It's very obvious from the science, from the research that we see that this is happening. Now, high levels of stress and trauma also seem to alter our metabolic environment, and this can in turn influence our prefrontal cortex. So, some of you in the audience may already recognize that. Our prefrontal cortex is responsible for a few things that are involved with self control. So, our self control processes that regulate emotional, motivational, and visceral mechanisms on food intake. Isn't that wild? I think that's interesting. So how do we really define like high levels of stress or trauma? I think that, my colleagues here are very helpful at helping the people that I work with understand that on another level. But here we're seeing the science. We're seeing that there's a neurobiological mechanism at play. We do need to learn more through research, however, but it appears that eating in a habitual way, eating these hyperpalatable foods that I'm going to list in a bit, can negatively impact the functions of the prefrontal cortex. So it's not working in our favor, right? We're not able to really regulate and practice that self-control like we might help. So we can blame a few things here. We can blame the stinking cancer and we can blame hyperpalatable foods. Some of those things we have control over, some of them don't. Some of them we don't, right? And that's a lot of the work we do here at Cancer Wellness Center, and certainly what I keep in mind when I'm working with individuals. So having easy access to hyperpalatable foods, I mentioned that. So an estimate from a research study that I was published not too long ago, they looked at the past 20 years of what food was available to us as consumers. And an estimated 69% of the food available is categorized as being hyperpalatable. That's a lot, right? That's the overwhelming majority of the food that we have access to. Now, during that 20-year span, hyperpalatable food increased by 14%. So not only did we already have this high abundance of it present to us, but we're really seeing this drastic increase in the amount that is produced and manufactured in this country. Our current food system is structured to promote overconsumption of ultra processed, or I would say even hyperpalatable foods through a variety of strategies. And they include a few things: price, promotions, aggressive marketing, particularly aggressive marketing towards children. And you might be able to identify that yourself. But it certainly is a pretty powerful system at play here, and that we're also competing with as consumers. Now, back to how our brain influences cravings, it could be done through a habit as well. So, a craving that leads to a behavior that provides a reward is going to eventually reinforce a habit, right? And we call this like the habit cycle or the habit loop. So, we have this cue, like we're not feeling great or we're stressed. We reach for something that's hyper palatable, something high in sugar, high in fat. We get a reward from that. We know our brain registers, hey, that feels good. So we do it again and we do it again and we do it again. And eventually that's going to lead to a habit, right? And we know what happens with habits. They're automatic. They're like, we're not consciously aware that it's happening. We just do it, right? So this cycle of craving and reward is particularly strong with those hyperpalatable foods, with those foods that we know stimulate the brain's reward centers. So that also is what's partly to blame here. There's a habit loop happening. Now, part of that other question was about the seasons. I thought that was a great question. I was like, do the seasons influence our cravings? They must, right? So we probably, and you can identify this for yourself, we probably do crave higher calorie foods during the colder months, and research does confirm that based on surveys. Stress and adequate sleep around the holidays, which tend to happen around the cooler months, also may contribute, which makes a lot of sense, right? So this is sort of getting a little complicated here. It's not just the cold weather, but there's other things that potentially are happening. Food is certainly a coping mechanism that is used by a lot of people. When we eat food we love, it can raise dopamine and serotonin levels in our brain, right? So if we're stressed, if we're not sleeping a lot, if we're having to travel or our plans got changed or we're not feeling well, all of this can contribute to our desire to eat something that's going to make us feel good. And the colder seasons might do that, right? Are the colder season. Environmental cues like watching more TV and spending less time outside and more time indoors may also trigger cravings. And sometimes cravings are just learned behaviors. It might be that, oh, during football season or during the holiday season, this is what we do. Again, there's that kind of habit loop, right? It's automatic and we're not thinking about it. What about aging? How does aging influence cravings? So I thought, again, this is a great question. I thought about this a little bit and I looked into the research, and there's a little bit out there that suggests that there could be a link between the two. That with aging comes changes, right, to our neurobiology, certainly to some of our hormones, certainly to our sleep patterns. We may now include some prescriptions that we were not on before, or take some over-the-counter products for some chronic conditions, or we might have some changes psychologically, and that can all contribute to cravings, right? Like I just listed. Some of us with aging, we do see that this is sort of a pattern. Some of us may develop insulin resistance or have some new prescriptions on board, like an antidepressant, and that certainly can have an influence on our desire for food and our appetite. Also, this is what fascinates me. As we age, we tend to develop decreased taste bud sensitivity. So at the same time, we experience certain flavors, particularly sweet ones, as being more appealing, which is fascinating. So what that means is we're not really tasting our other foods as much, but we're tasting sweet. So of course, what are we going to go towards? Because we like to eat things that taste good, right? So we're going to go towards our sweet foods, and those sweeter intensity foods are going to satisfy our palate. So that may help explain that answer or that question a little bit better. Okay. Next questions, does eating certain foods trigger cravings? Are there any foods that minimize or reduce cravings? Great questions. So foods that trigger cravings, I've been talking about this for the past few slides. It's those hyper palatable foods. They send these signals to our brain and they say, hey, this feels really good. And there's a release also of dopamine, and that makes us feel good. It's like this reward that we get from it. You might be wondering what are hyperpalatable foods? They are not just salty or sweet or rich, which really sort of is like fatty foods. It's like the extra, right? Extra salty, extra sweet, extra rich, or it's a combination of those things. And some of these hyperpalatable foods are exactly that. It's a combination of the palatability related nutrients that are present at thresholds that don't normally occur in nature. So think of like an apple, which is sweet, and we can describe it in a lot of ways, versus an apple pie a la mode. Very different, right? There's some extra there. There's some extra sweet, there's some extra rich, right? It's creamy, it's fatty, it's extra sweet. So research is at the moment, believe it or not, trying to create a database of how to define or classify hyperpalatable foods using quantitative definitions. And so what they're looking at is the percent daily value. Now, there's probably going to be some flaws to this, and just for your information, I don't expect you to know this, but this is what they're looking to do. About 25% or more of our percent daily values from fat, and about 0.3% sodium by weight, or 20% or more of our calories from fat and more than 20% of our calories from added sugars, or more than 40 percent of our calories from carbohydrates and more than 20.2, sorry, percent sodium by weight. So that's what they're using in this research, and we'll see what unfolds about that. But in the meantime, we do have a good idea of what these hyperpalatable foods are. And here's a short working list. So hopefully none of these are like a surprise to you. It's our sweet chocolate. It's not our cocoa. It's not our cacao. It's our sweet chocolate that's mostly sugar, right? It's ice cream. It's pizza. It's potato chips. It's cookies and cakes and French fries and pastries and cheese dips and cured meats and fried chicken. Salty, fatty, sugar. That's what comes to mind, hopefully, when you see these slides. Now, what are these examples? One clue that a food is hyperpalatable is that it's high in sodium. I think that's a really good takeaway too, especially if you're looking at packages or food labels. You can look at the amount of sodium in a product, and if it's over 20% of the daily value, that's high in sodium. And that's something that's going to definitely taste different to your taste buds, more so than what it's exposed to elsewhere in other foods. Now, and if you think about it, this is why a lot of nutrition experts advocate for making your own and trying to cook as much as you can at home, because you can make your own version of a cookie or a cake, or you could fry your own chicken, or you can even make your own pizza, right? You can make your own ice cream, and you could use less, a lot less than what food companies are using, and still probably enjoy the product that you're making at home, and it's going to have less of an impact in terms of its hyperpalatability factor, right? So that you're satisfied by it, but it's not something that you're getting this uber sense of reward from, right? That's beyond what we're typically used to. Now, what about any foods that minimize or reduce cravings? I wish I had an answer. There's none that we know of. There's nothing that I know that exists from research to suggest that that's the case. If we want to reduce cravings, we probably need to address the root cause or causes of our cravings, which I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to help as I conclude this slide with what are some great ways to kind of minimize and reduce cravings. So stay tuned for how to do that. Okay, next questions. What does it mean if I'm craving specific foods such as sunflower seeds or cauliflower? And what would cause a craving for me? And that's beef in particular. Interesting questions. These were similar, so I'm going to sort of answer them all at once. Can a craving be for something good that my body wants? So, for example, I was being evaluated for PMS and was told that spinach and red bell peppers were not a craving because they were good for me. Could a craving for salty snacks, not highly processed ones in my pantry, be related to needing more salt and then making me thirsty because I ate it, so then I would hydrate more? Really good questions. Now, what about cravings for specific foods? Does that mean that we need a nutrient? Well, it seems like that would be obvious, right? Like if we are craving something, that means our body needs it, right? That's because we're deficient in that nutrient. But the research has looked at this, and the evidence is poor. So I'm sorry to break that news to you. So we don't think that if we're craving a particular food, it's because we need it. One study suggested that when people consume a monotonous, nutritionally balanced liquid diet, they reported more cravings than they did during their baseline when they weren't eating that monotonous diet. So it seems like avoiding certain foods, even though they were completely replenished nutritionally, it was like the psychology of it, right? They were avoiding those foods, it made them want them more, even because their body was completely repleted. They were eating a balanced diet, they had no issues, they had no need, right? So why would they be craving anything, right? So it seems to be psychological there. Different reports showed that cravings during the premenstrual time frame did not differ after menopause. So another sort of example of like nutrient requirements are different at those phases, but it didn't seem to change for those women in that research study. And we tend to crave foods that are high in sugar, salt, and or fat. And most of the work that I do and most dietitians are doing in this country are trying to get people to eat less of those things because we already eat too many of those things, right? So we don't think we're craving that because we're deficient in sugar, salt, or fatty foods. And an example of that is that you may have heard the myth that we crave chocolate because we might need magnesium. But chocolate contains a measly 30 milligrams in a serving compared to something that has 5 times that amount, 150 milligrams in a serving of spinach. But we're not craving spinach. So that myth just doesn't pan out because if we really needed the magnesium, why wouldn't our body crave something that supplied a significant amount, right? So sorry to break that one to you, break that news to you. What about cauliflower and sunflower seeds? If you're craving something healthy, I think most people would agree, consider yourself lucky. This is great. This is something you crave. Now, it could be, I wonder, and I want you to just, because there's no science to suggest this is the case, I want you to ask yourself, is it related to something? Like, do you associate those foods with like a positive memory? Is it a childhood memory? Is it a positive experience you had with those foods and you're craving that for comfort? I'm not really sure. Maybe you're craving crunch. I'm not really sure there. So that's a hard one to answer. And I think like I would lean towards, again, the psychology of it, but I wouldn't worry about it because it's cauliflower and sunflower seeds. And if you're eating it in a way that you agree works for you and serves you, I would go for it. What I'm going to talk about in a moment is the distinction between a craving and physical hunger. And for most of us, most of the time, to honor physical hunger and eat food rather than honor a craving and eat certain foods, we prefer probably to eat when we are physically hungry rather than to honor that craving. So just stay tuned for that. What if you're craving salt? So if someone came to me and asked, I'm craving a lot of salt, I would just dive deeper to see, do they need more salt, right? Because just to make sure that we're covering the bases here. And I would ask these questions. Are you sweating a lot? I mean, it is warm, right? We're certainly have hit that time of this year. Are you sweating a lot and you're not replacing fluids lost adequately? Is it possible that you're dehydrated at all? Are you on a diuretic? How much salt and sodium do you normally eat? And let's review what you're currently eating. Because chances are you're probably eating plenty. Have you recently restricted your salt intake and perhaps you're craving something that you're restricting? Cravings at the end of the day with all of these things are most likely tied to some sort of psychological cause or a social or an environmental cue, and they're less likely to a nutrient deficiency. So keep in mind, most of us overeat salt and sodium, more than double the amount we probably actually need. But if you're concerned about this and you're worried, do I need more salt? Am I not drinking enough fluids? I would just double check with your healthcare provider because I can't really adequately address that in a presentation like this one. So hopefully that's helpful for you. It certainly wouldn't hurt to try to drink more fluids and see if that helps and helps with your cravings for salt, just to make sure you're hydrated at this time. That wouldn't hurt to do that. Okay, next questions. When should I listen to my body versus say, sorry, no Kit Kat today? I love the very specific question about Kit Kats. It's funny how we crave very specific foods, right? What would help satisfy the craving for sweet and salty and creamy? Great questions here. I love them. All right, so here's the thing. I want to start with that first one. How do I know if I should give into the craving or just say no? We get a little concerned about restrictions and restraining ourselves from eating because what happens, and we know this, enough research has proved this by now, and you may know this in your own personal history. If you've ever dieted or restricted yourself, this tends to lead to more cravings. This is what happens psychologically. And studies prove this, that when a feeling of not eating what or as much as we would like, despite having eaten enough, plays a part in generating food cravings. So even though we may give ourselves half of a Kit Kat bar, maybe it's a 4-piece Kit Kat bar and we take 2 of them. We might be satisfied, but we might be like, I want that other half. Like there's a psychology here that's happening, right, with that, and that's what's leading probably to the craving. So experts argue that restrictive eating habits tend to create this cycle, and a cycle is never a good idea because we tend to be in it We have a hard time getting out of this cycle. It's just like a habit. So I presented this earlier in the year where with restrictions and restricted eating, we tend to, what happens is like we hold ourselves from doing it. We restrict, we restrict, we restrict. Eventually, we are going to struggle with that restriction. We're going to feel deprived. It's going to increase our desire to have more. So then eventually we kind of feel out of control. We eat that food and then we double down, right? We go back and say, I can never eat that again. So we just set ourselves up again for a restriction. So it makes sense for most people I work with to try not to restrict themselves. And it's a really weird thing to grapple with. Like, oh, I should have the whole Kit Kat bar. But most people do find they can navigate cravings better when they allow themselves to eat those foods. Now, you might need some work. You might need to work with a dietitian. You might need to work with a mental health counselor to navigate that experience of how does that feel for you and learning what is the right way to go through that process of eating something and then how you feel about it, right? Because what we want ultimately is a way to interact with food that serves you and is mostly healthy, right? So a little bit more about hunger, cravings, and mindful eating. So I promised I would come back to this. There's a difference between physical hunger and cravings. And what we want to try to do most of the time is honor physical hunger. That's when we eat, right? Cravings, that's probably something else happening. And we can work to, reduce or minimize the amount of cravings and eating those foods over time. So this makes sense, and I'm sure you are going to understand this pretty well. Physical hunger is sort of builds gradually, right? We don't go from 0 to 60 with hunger. It's not like all of a sudden we're starving. For most people, I find that. They might have a cycle where every few hours, maybe up to 6 hours, they start to notice like, oh, I'm getting hungry now. Whereas cravings, ooh, are they intense? They come on all of a sudden, right? And there's a big distinction there. With physical hunger, it is physical. You can feel it. You might get stomach, you might have a growling stomach, you might feel empty, you might feel depleted, low energy, you might have stomach pain. Whereas cravings, that's usually absent. And you're actually like having this thought process where again it's like this intensity, this hit of dopamine of like, oh, I'm excited, I'm gonna go eat that. And you're not even eating the food yet, right? You're just imagining it. As I shared, physical hunger tends to cycle over time, right? So after we eat, we're probably not physically hungry for quite some time. Whereas a craving, it's completely unrelated to time. We may have just eaten a 4-course meal and then we're craving something still, right? Physical hunger will typically go away and then rise again. It cycles. Whereas cravings, it's going to persist. We might be completely full and we're still craving something. Physical hunger and eating to it leads to a feeling of satisfaction. Where if this is the issue that I take with a lot of people I work with cravings, is that I don't want food to ever make you feel guilty or make you feel ashamed of yourself, because that's not what I think food needs to be for you. I want food to be your friend. And I want it to lead to feelings of confidence and empowerment, not guilt and shame. So mindful eating, believe it or not, it's the super powerful tool that we can use to raise awareness around eating, around our sensations of hunger and physical hunger, and then also fullness, and then also our thoughts and our feelings about food and how much and what we eat. Really important to do, right? So mindfulness is a really great tool. And this leads to increased satisfaction with meals when we're using mindful eating. And it eats in a way that serves our needs. And hopefully not just in the physical sense, but the emotional sense, because we can blend healthy foods that are nutritious with those that are a little extra salty, sweet, and fatty, right? And we can find a way to balance those. So a little bit more about mindful eating, and this is sort of what I would encourage you to do any one or all of these things and work on this because it's a great way to enjoy food and all that it's got to give for us in our life, right? Mind and body, how it can benefit us. I think we want to, in as much as way possible, make eating an experience. So avoiding eating on the go, avoiding distractions, and when we're eating to just eat, right? And make it the only activity we're doing. Think about mindful bites. So really taking time with food, looking at it, observing it, taking a bite at a time, clearing our hands as they have here, putting our silverware down, simply just chewing, paying attention, listening, feeling, tasting, right? All of it. It's all encompassing and not judging the experience, just experiencing it. And then after we swallow, pause. Now I'm guilty of not doing this, but pause and then take a breath before you take another bite. And then also hunger scales are very helpful. They help us to really kind of, in a tangible way, like identify what's happening, right? Because otherwise we're pretty automatic and we're not really conscious of what's going on. So if we can label our hunger and our fullness, it helps to kind of break apart and help us be present to the experience of eating. So if we can rate our hunger on a scale of 1 to 10 for example, makes sense to try to eat around 4 to 7. So if 1 is really hungry, we don't really want to eat when we're starving and I can eat my arm, right? We want to eat around 4 because then our hunger is starting to wake up. We can honor it with a decent meal and at a pace that works for us. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe a 10 is uncomfortably full. We probably don't want to be eating when we're feeling that way either, right? So maybe when we're just noticing that our hunger is going away and we're starting to feel satisfied if we can push the food away. More to mindful eating, we want to rate our awareness. Also, you can do that on a scale of 1 to 10. How attentive are you to the moment? Or are you zoned out? I did that last night in the kitchen. I was totally zoned out looking at my emails. And also slowing down. That makes a lot of sense. Setting a timer. I've had people successfully do this where because they noticed they were eating in like 5 or 10 minutes when it took them an hour to prepare the meal. They're done with it within 10 minutes. So they wanted to kind of sit and enjoy it in a way that kind of slowed them down. Leaving food on the plate rather than being a member of the Clean Plate Club. Keeping healthier foods out where you see them. This is a great strategy because otherwise in our environment, those choices are not readily available, right? And the opposite for those less healthy foods. So keeping them out of sight, keeping them off counters and off our desks, managing our stress, it goes a long way, right? For a lot of different reasons, but it seems to help with cravings. So relaxation, breathing techniques, going for a walk, finding a way to unwind, enjoying your favorite activities, whether it's going to the lake, listening to some music, whatever it might be. Cancer Wellness Center has so many amazing programs that something is bound to kind of pique your interest and help you really work with the stress that you might have in your life. When you work with a dietitian, a lot of times this is what we might be approaching if you're thinking about, oh, I have these cravings, how do I work with them? We're going to aim for nutritionally balanced meals. That seems to help with blood sugar levels. It may also help with some hormones that are contributing to appetite and cravings. So that's exactly what a consult with a dietitian can help you realize. Minimize long stretches of not eating, right? Because remember, physical hunger, if we can honor that, it's probably going to cycle every 4 to 6 hours. So if we work with that and tune into that sensation, then we're going to have less time to worry about cravings in between. Minimize hyperpalatable foods. That's a biggie, right? Most of the food that's in our environment is hyperpalatable. It's everywhere. It's everywhere we turn. And it seems to spike those reward centers in our brain. So of course we want them, right? So if we eat less of them, we're going to win in that category. Limit those environmental cues, right? So if a commercial on TV suggests that you go to your freezer and grab that pint of ice cream, that's probably a cue. And that could develop into a habit over time, right? Now, we can also unlearn food cravings by avoiding the food or changing the association of a trigger or a cue. So a good example of that, I work with a lot of people who say, I always crave something sweet after dinner. And it's probably a habit. That's probably what's going on there, right? So literally they're craving it because during dinner, they're thinking about dessert already. It's not even time for dessert. They haven't even given their full attention to dinner yet. And they're craving and thinking about dessert. So that may help to replace that with something else, like a short walk. Sometimes people replace it with another healthier food, but I don't even know if ultimately that's the answer because it's still not physical hunger that you're honoring. But certainly, I think you're going to do what works best for you, and a dietitian can help you learn just what that might be. And did you know we can increase dopamine without food? Give me some of that, right? We call these dopamine hits. So take a walk in nature on a sunny day, dance, sing, watch something funny. All of those have been shown to raise dopamine levels, and that is important to do regularly because the cravings are otherwise what is doing it. Okay. So these are healthy choices to crave because someone asked that question. What if I want something creamy? So these are just the examples that come to my mind. You may look at these and be like, Lori, you're kidding me. I'm not going to crave these foods at any point in my life. But if you're craving something creamy, avocado is great for that. It's also fatty, healthy fats, right? That might be really satisfying. That, like an avocado toast, that to me is craveable. I also love almond butter on toast. That's craveable to me. Like I'm really satisfied when I eat that. Warming up peanut butter and combining that with some low sugar vanilla yogurt and maybe even pureeing some frozen bananas in, and you can mix that all together, almost like an ice cream, a banana ice cream. That's all really creamy and delicious and certainly nutritious. Not extra, right? Not extra sweet, extra salt, extra fat. It's all really probably just right. Crunchy. So I love the idea of like a whole grain cereal. I have a lot of people who make some great trail mixes, like homemade versions, right? So they're a lot less salty, a lot less fatty or sweet. And they use something like a whole grain cereal, which has a lot of fiber, but it's got the crunch. So it's going to help really satisfy that need for crunch, but also give some great nutrition at the same time. Low salt or unsalted nuts, whole grain crisp bread. I have some great examples and I can name names. And plain popcorn is great for that too. It's got that great crunch. Squishy, and I'm like, who would crave something squishy? But I read this somewhere. So think of like your gummy candies. That's being squishy, right? So frozen grapes or a homemade tapioca pudding. I've never tried, but I would give it a whirl. Or cherry tomatoes with string cheese. That's all kind of squishy, right? And might crave that texture. Um, and then crispy. So freeze-dried fruit, a fresh crisp apple, air-fried vegetables that are extra crispy. And I have a recipe to consider if you're willing to try that, or some fresh cut carrots, celery, and peppers. Personally, I like to combine. So I might do crispy and creamy. Like I might do the fresh cut vegetables with some almond butter, and I would be very happy. And it's also like a touch um, sweet, maybe, especially if I do a fruit, and a little bit of hit of salt with that almond butter too. So that would satisfy a lot of things that I might be wanting. Last set of questions. What is the best snack to eat? And then trying to stay low carbs and high protein, but I can't eat nuts. So I'm looking for quick and easy snacks. So I would love to answer these questions, and I will in a great program that's coming up in 2 weeks right here at Cancer Wellness Center. And I shared a link to register for that. So if you ask these questions or if you're watching right now, I would encourage you to sign up for our program in just a couple weeks. Okay, so I'll share that now. So that's called Snack Smart, and we're calling it Power Bites for Wellness. It's on a Tuesday. It's going to be a great program. I'm working on it right now. And it's going to be, you get to try in person. So you get to have a little bit of what I'm sharing, I think might work to help with some of those cravings. But there's nutrition, right? So I might introduce you to new ways of having things or a brand new to you option. Now, these other websites you might find helpful: How to Handle Food Cravings, The Mindful Dietitian. She's out of Australia. What a brilliant title, right? Mindful Dietitian. But she has a podcast and she has a blog. So if you're curious and to learn more in that avenue, Working with Food Cravings from Kaiser Permanente, nice little article there. And then an eating meditation. So if you're looking towards mindfulness and a way to eat mindfully, this might be an interesting way for you to kind of explore that for yourself. Now I shared some recipes. There's some like root vegetable chips for that crunch, some frozen yogurt, and it's like mango and raspberry with yogurt. Delicious. And then some, if you like a little sweet, the date bites are like perfect to satisfy that sweet desire that you might be having. Now, our next Ask the Dietitian is in September already, the end of the summer. And we have a great topic: processed food. It's very popular right now, this topic of highly processed or processed foods. So I want you to ask any of your questions related to that. And I hope to see you in September at that time. I'm going to stop my share here.